Welcome to the NanoCap podcast. I'm your host, Will Chernlin, and I'm excited to have you join me on this journey through the world of NanoCap companies. For the past decade, I've talked to thousands of business owners across various industries. It's been an enlightening experience revealing the vast tapestries of entrepreneurship and innovation that thrives beneath the surface of mainstream media coverage. Each week, I will interview different leaders of NanoCap publicly traded companies to learn about their history, what they do now, and their future. As a reminder, none of this information is financial advice, and it is all for entertainment purposes only. Let's start this week's episode. Hi, everyone. In this week's episode, I have the pleasure of speaking with James Sapirstein, CEO of Cocrystal Pharma, stock ticker COCP. Cocrystal Pharma is a clinical stage biotech company developing novel therapeutics to meet a growing global need for effective and safe antiviral treatments. James, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So, James, I want to go way back in the day. I want to go right after you're graduating Rutgers, and you worked as a kind of like a pharmaceutical sales rep there for like 12 years at big companies like Roche and Eli Lilly. First and foremost, what was it like back then? Because nowadays, the pharmaceutical sales rep is kind of like the sexy job out of college. Like, you know that person's going to be making good money. You know they're going to be doing cool things, competing for some trip to Bahamas inside their office and all that kind of stuff. What was it like back then, and kind of what drew you to the sales side of things after going to pharmacy school?
Yeah, wow. So that's a great question. No one's ever asked me that before. But so just a correction, I wasn't in sales for 12 years. I did sales for about 6.
Sales and training.
Yeah, sales and training, which was a very different modality. So coming out of school, back then, the industry was very, very different. And I decided I was only going to interview with 2 companies. It was either Eli Lilly or Merck. And sales reps, there were really maybe 12, 13 companies that were out in the field. There weren't that many. We were called detail people. And we really were more of consultants than we were salespeople. Yeah, granted, we had sales targets, things of that sort, but the doctors also weren't as busy. They weren't seeing 30, 35 patients a day. They were seeing 15, 20 patients a day. So they welcomed us in. We did a lot of reading. We did a lot of research for them. And it was more of seeing your friends more than anything else and helping them with their prescribing habits. When I first joined Lilly had an infectious disease group. I went right into hospital sales, which was unusual for someone of my level at that point. You used to have to work 3 or 4 years in sales before you got promoted. And I was promoting human insulin, or Humulin at the time, and also their antibiotic line, their injectable antibiotic line, up in Albany, New York, at the Albany Medical Center. And I have to say, I used to get phone calls late in the night for consultation. Residents needed information. It was a very, very different job. Lilly at that time only hired pharmacists. And unless you went to a top 10 business school, that was the only way to work your way up through the marketing organization.
Yeah, it seems like it was kind of a new field back then, because you can't imagine too much earlier than that. And then also just the need for you all back then. I can imagine nowadays some sales rep coming into some doctor's office trying to explain to them why their GLP-1 variant is the best. And the doctor goes, yeah, I know. But back in the day, you must have actually were the first person to tell a bunch of these doctors about these new things that you had and that you could solve certain things that they had. And it must have been super educational. I can imagine some doctor in some city in the middle of nowhere and you telling them, actually, we do have a cure for that now, kind of thing.
Absolutely. And we as reps, we spent a lot of time in the hospital libraries researching things. Physicians routinely would ask me, hey, go find this out. Go look up these journals and bring them back to me. And we became part of their office, basically. And we didn't have to bring in lunch, and we didn't have to bring in all these things or pens or whatever to get their attention. It was more of, how can you help me? How can you help me in the office? And it was really a pleasure in the job. I mean, honestly, I enjoyed it.
And so between there and now, you've done a little bit of everything. You've worked at basically every size biotech company, from starting companies, it seems, to working at ones with tens of thousands of employees. So with all this experience, with you seeing everything from A to Z, when Cocrystal Pharma kind of slid across your desk, what made you kind of stop for a second and go, hey, this is a little bit different. This is actually where I want to spend my time?
So that's a terrific question. So as well, Look, I went up through the rank in sales, and I went into marketing, as you alluded to. I did sales training, which is training salespeople, but also training managers. Back in the early days of Roche, HIV was new, and I launched the very first national sales force in HIV with someone named Dan O'Day, who's now the CEO of Gilead. So the antiviral space is always very near and dear to me, especially when you're fighting an epidemic like HIV. I later went on to other positions internationally in Switzerland, but also went to Bristol Myers Squibb, where I was heading up international infectious diseases, the commercial side. So really got a chance to launch a lot of products and really, as I used to call it, the Black Death of our time, which was HIV/AIDS, trying to figure it out. So as time went on, as you said, I had a long career. I worked at large companies, small companies, led large organizations, small organizations. And when this opportunity came about, it was a chance to work with a Nobel laureate like Roger Kornberg, who has a great technology, but more importantly, look at some unmet needs in the virology space. Virology has always been near and dear to me. We'll talk about our platform in a second, but norovirus, there's nothing out there. I mean, people suffer from it every day, and there's nothing out there for it. We're looking at influenza A and influenza B. Granted, there's the flu shot, but still 30% of the people get flu shots still get the flu. So it's still an unmet need. We're looking at rhinovirus, which is known as the common cold. Again, a variety of different variants of rhinovirus, no cure. So we're looking at all of these things. Now, I find that exciting to try to kind of rein in some of these viruses where there just haven't been any answers.
So James, we've danced around a little bit, but in your own words, what is Cocrystal Pharma?
So Cocrystal Pharma really is an antiviral platform company. We go after the virus in a very different way that other antivirals have gone. So I'm a big believer as a CEO of a small company, you have to have many shots on goal. And more than likely, all the shots are different products and different points of development, and it's expensive. We run things very inexpensively because we have a platform. We have a platform where we have a couple of these crystal compounds that can work in a variety of different viruses. So we have multiple shots on goal.
So first kind of main shot on goal, you mentioned it earlier with the norovirus. Tell me about CDI 988. Or how do you call it, 988? Or what do you call it internally?
I actually just call it 988. It's a lot easier for me. I'm still new, it's easier for me to remember numerically who we are. So 988 is a very interesting compound. There are several strains of norovirus that are circulating around the world. We're testing it for Snowy Mountain, which is the main norovirus. We're testing it at Emory University in a very closed environment right now, and we're infecting people. We do expect to see results towards the end of this year in what we call the 1B study. Even though, in my mind, it's a 1B/2 study, proof of concept, we still need to discuss that with the FDA. All of this was negotiated with the FDA way before I started. But in short, if it works, and we hope it does, we've not seen any safety issues or anything for that matter just yet. But if it works, we might have a solution to treating norovirus.
So when you say solution, do you think more in terms of, and it's going to be a long question, but in terms of your wife is starting to get sick on a cruise ship and you just start taking it immediately, and not only does it make her symptoms less, but then you avoid it? Is it something that you would just keep on just in your inventory at all times, not really need a prescription for it if you're ran a nursing home, for example, and a bunch of people are immune compromised and you want to just get on top of it immediately? Or when would you take it? Do you take it after the fact? Do you take it before? Tell me kind of about how the actual drug works.
Yeah, I think you actually hit the nail on the head. So we're going to need to do more work to answer all those questions. However, the hope is that we work adjacent to any future norovirus vaccine. Moderna just had one that failed at phase 3, so there's not a really strong norovirus vaccine on the horizon. But it could work, for instance, as a prophylactic or a vaccine. So if you are on a cruise ship and someone tests, not that there's no real test for noroviruses, you'll know when you see it, right? But
it's hard to fake.
Look under a microscope. But yeah, if you have it stocked in a cruise ship, you distribute it to all the passengers to prevent it from occurring throughout the ship and shutting down a cruise. College campuses, you do the same thing. And those are what we call acute types of norovirus infections. There are chronic, which you mentioned with nursing homes, where some of these patients are shedding the virus for up to 2 years. And, no one really tests them because nursing home patients, yes, unfortunately, they have bedpans next to them, and that's the way these folks are cared for. But they're in pain or they're uncomfortable. So perhaps nursing homes are stocked as well. So as soon as they have one patient that they're pretty sure has norovirus, they can give it to all the other residents in the nursing home to make sure that it doesn't spread. So that's one aspect of it, to answer your question, which is a prophylactic or kind of a vaccine adjacent approach. But there's also the treatment approach, which we need to do more work on. We need to do more studies on that, which is once there is an outbreak, can you treat the patients who are already infected? What's going to happen to those patients? And that remains to be seen. Right now, in our 1B trial, we're infecting people to see, if we reduce symptomology, if symptoms being obviously the nausea, the diarrhea, cramping, and if we reduce all of that. So the FDA will let us know if they feel that's a treatment or if that's a prophylaxis. And then we'll come back and probably have to do another study to delineate that.
I had no idea it could kind of linger for like up to 2 years. I think that's a big talking point that I think a lot of people wouldn't know, especially in like a nursing home situation where, yeah, like you said, it could be, you don't know exactly what could be the cause. So I got a dumb question for you. With it being something like norovirus being so obvious, as you mentioned earlier, and your trials and such, how do you do like a placebo, like double-blind study?
So that's not a dumb question also. That's the right question. So in our 1B trial, we actually we give some people placebo, we give some people the drug, and everyone gets the norovirus. They swallow a little tube of the norovirus. So everyone's going to become sick with the norovirus. That's why it's a closed environment that we're doing at Emory. We then start testing people to see how much viral shedding is going on, in their stool samples, and we'll have those results. The placebo group did worse than the drug treatment group, but it is a controlled placebo-controlled trial.
And so you have these people, like 40 people living in like the wing of like a dorm room, like locked down kind of thing?
In many ways, yeah, they're in a clinical setting, right? They're sequestered for well over a week.
That's one of the more intense studies, honestly, I've heard of. Just because of like you said, you have to be on top of it and all that. But there's many, obviously, ones where you can come in once a week and take a shot and then leave and then tell them how you feel the next week, type of thing. But no, was that hard to get people for the trial? And like for future trials, are you going to have to do this, but with 1,000 people, or how does this scale?
So it's not an easy trial to enroll. There's no mistaking that it's in a college campus, which a lot of college students will do these types of things in order to earn some money. But yeah, it's expensive, but it's a lot easier to do than trying to track a norovirus outbreak on Carnival cruises or someplace like that. So how do you ship the drug? How do you have a controlled environment? So this is a very tightly controlled environment and a difficult trial to enroll. Imagine if you're a young subject and you say, okay, we're going to pay you X amount of money. You have to stay hospitalized for a week or more, and you're going to get very violently ill. Yeah, it's not something everybody signs up for. So it's not an easy trial. The question about how large the next trial needs to be, that's something we have to negotiate with the FDA because we do have a fast track approval process that was given to us earlier this year. FDA always is, across all therapeutics, is always looking at medications where there's a really strong need, and they will work with you to try to figure out the best way forward. Certainly, the FDA would love us to do a trial in 1,000 to 2,000 patients. However, how feasible is that, and how long would it take? It would take years, so it's not very feasible.
So you mentioned, and basically every biotech company I talked to has kind of their spearhead thing that they're going after, like norovirus. But then you also mentioned that you always have to have multiple pokers in the fire at all times. So I know way in the past, I spoke to your company a couple of years ago, and one of the viruses it was going after was like COVID-19. So as you mentioned, you have one kind of solution that can solve multiple different types of viruses. But what are the other things on the horizon that you're kind of looking at that you might go after next?
Well, let me just address COVID for a second. So My last company, we had a COVID drug that we looked at and it failed, right? So when COVID was happening, a lot of people were throwing a lot of antivirals at it. We do have activity against coronavirus. We'll see. We'll see. Coronavirus may change again. It's one of the most highly mutating viruses in the history of mankind. So we do have something in the backdrop that we're ready in case we need it. So I just wanted to address that. But it's not front and center because right now the COVID vaccines are working well and there are viable solutions. We are looking at influenza A. Again, if you think about some of the old drugs like Tamiflu, which is a very common drug. Tamiflu has been around for 27, 28 years at this point. It has a very high resistance rate. By the time, if you feel you have the flu and you've gone in to see your doctor or you go to the ER, that's probably 3 or 4 days into your flu. They may prescribe Tamiflu and it's about a 90% resistance rate. It's probably not going to work. Just like everyone gets a Z-Pack for everything. A Z-Pack is an antibacterial. It doesn't really work for just about anything anymore, but people feel comfortable taking something and the doctor feels comfortable giving you something because you're going to overcome it anyway, which isn't great for antimicrobial resistance, but it's another story. So we do have a great influenza A platform where we believe we won't have the same resistance issues that Tamiflu, and we'll have a real solution for influenza A. We also have another platform for rhinovirus, as I spoke to before. We do have interest in large pharma on that because people with rhinovirus, you mentioned earlier on immunocompromised patients. A lot of folks who are immunocompromised sometimes will die from a cold. That cold will turn into pneumonia. They're going to get hospitalized. And you hear, they may have died because of cancer, because of many other things. But sometimes it's respiratory issues related to rhinovirus. That's not something that's well documented, but however, it's absolutely prevalent when you speak to physicians in the CCU and ICUs of the hospital. So pharma has a lot of interest there to see if we can find a solution to that. And our fourth platform, which is active right now, is something we call the flavivirus, F-L-A-V-I virus, flavivirus. And that includes viruses that you've really always heard of, but they're not really prevalent in the United States. So we are looking, we're definitely talking to the government about funding some of these, getting some non-dilutive funding, because the U.S. government tends to look at these programs very strongly because we have troops stationed all over the world.
So as we wrap up here, I'm curious, since you mentioned in your last answer, talking to doctors, and then you mentioned earlier kind of how doctors prescribe things like, I think you mentioned like a Z-patch or something to that effect. So with your experience with boots on the ground, working with actual doctors in the clinic, and then being boots on the ground, helping out with kind of solving the AIDS, HIV epidemic, what lessons have you brought to the kind of table as a CEO now of how to actually get these things that are in the lab into an actual patient's body?
Well, it's all about the science. It's always been about the science and the patients, and you have to stick to that. Unfortunately, I'm definitely not getting off on this tangent. We're a very interesting political dynamic right now where Dr. Google is telling everyone what they should be doing. It's really about the science and putting data behind there and bringing products to market that work. And that's all we could really do. I mean, we first launched drugs with HIV. They weren't very good, but they were, at least they would put the disease off for 9 months to a year and a half until we figured out how to really attack the virus in 3 or 4 different directions. And I think we're seeing the same with some of these viruses that we're working against as well, is finding the right solution and maybe even working with other antivirals to find the right solution. So it's about scientific rigor, and that's never going to change.
So where do you see the company 5 years from now? Kind of what gets you out of bed in the morning that gets you excited that, hey, if everything goes right, this is where we're going to be in 2030?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm very excited about the company. We need to be properly capitalized to get our programs going forward. You mentioned earlier on, we're not a GLP-1, we're not an immunology oncology company. We're definitely not sexy, but the next pandemic is coming. Those of us in the field know it. We just don't know what the viruses can be. It might be a bird flu, it might be something else. It's coming. So we want to be a company that's prepared for that. So in the next 5 years, we can be $200 million company over several billion-dollar company. It really depends on what's coming, and we're laying the groundwork for that right now.
No, it's even you're speaking about that today with Moderna is up 130% today, last I checked. And so even the biggest of the biggest can get even bigger. So, it's an exciting time with all these different solutions. So, James, as we wrap up here, if people want to learn a little bit more about Cocrystal Pharma, where should I send my audience?
Well, I mean, we have our website, cocrystalpharma.com. You're going to start seeing me at more investor conferences. I'm going to Wainwright in September. I'm hopefully going to go to the Jefferies one in November in London, and JP Morgan. You'll start seeing me at some of these bigger investor conferences. Come up, start talking to me. I'm very bullish on the company. I'm an antiviral guy, so I'm excited to be back in the scheme of things.
James, thanks for all you do and spending time on the podcast today. And for those of you still listening, please remember to subscribe and review. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your time.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not provide financial, legal, or any other advice. The information is not investment advice or any offer to buy or sell any securities or to make any investment. The views expressed by the guests are their own, and any reference to third-party products, services, or information does not constitute an endorsement therefor by NanoCap Podcast or its affiliates. The NanoCap Podcast express disclaims